Welcome to Murder Most Foul, a podcast devoted to exploring famous murder cases of our time. Some solved, some unsolved, but all fascinating and guaranteed to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. I'm your host, Jim Solanowski. Today's episode: The Good Nurse. When is a good nurse not? Registered nurse Charlie Cullen was dubbed the Angel of Death by the media. But Cullen was no mercy killer, nor was he a simple monster. Implicated in the deaths of as many as 400 patients, he was perhaps the most prolific serial killer in American history. Ultimately, the good nurse was caught, thanks to the homicide detectives who worked around the clock, and the nurse who had to choose between protecting her colleague and stopping a potential serial killer. The Good Nurse by Charles Graeber, dubbed Chilling by Stephen King, weaves an urgent and terrifying tale of madness, humanity, and heroism, utilizing previously unseen police records, wiretap recordings, interviews, and jailhouse conversations with Cullen himself. And now, sit back as I welcome Charles Graeber to share his riveting piece of investigative journalism today on Murder Most Foul.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Glad to be here.
So before we get started, why don't you, just so my audience has a little idea of your curriculum vitae. What is your employment record kind of thing? What do you do? And then we'll get into how you found. I always like to know, you can only write so many books. So there's got to be something in here that drew you to it. So off you go.
Yeah, absolutely. My background is that of a journalist. I write long form nonfiction, which just means long, very voiced stories about whatever I find interesting, which is often criminal. I'm drawn to crime. It's sort of it's a break in the social contract, so it's a really fascinating moment to examine. This story originated after I finished, or this book originated as a story, and that happened after I completed a particularly difficult edit for New York Magazine. And it was traditional in journalism back when, there was such a thing, and there were editors, and they had a little bit of an expense account. They'd at least take you out for dinner and drinks afterwards. And no journalist, no matter what, turned that down, because, we're like, snakes. We basically might, yeah. So you just got to, stock up for the long winter. And I was really determined not to write another magazine, another story for that editor or for the magazine, actually, just because it had been a difficult twist. But we wanted to know if I was interested in anything. And at the very end of the meal and the drinks, I had to admit I was carrying a small scrap of newspaper in my wallet because it was something along the lines of serial killer nurse attempts to donate kidney from jail. And that I thought was really weird. And weird is good. I also, it's just the headline you can't believe. And I looked into it, and it was true. And it was, at least the story at that point was that there was a nurse who'd killed some people in a hospital. There was an angel of death type nurse. And he wouldn't talk to anybody, wouldn't talk to the press, wouldn't talk to the families of the victims, wouldn't utter a word. And everybody, all the major outlets had tried to reach him, every journalist, 60 Minutes, people like that. And he refused to speak. He was going to go down in silence, but he was also attempting to donate a kidney. He'd been asked to donate a kidney by someone who and through testing, they discovered was a perfect match for his kidney. And I thought it was really fascinating that what was happening there was that the family members of his victims didn't want to see the man who had played God with their loved ones being able to continue to play God from behind bars. That was an aspect of his punishment. And I thought, yes, but another innocent person will die. And so this, I thought, really went to the heart of, what is punishment? What is the justice system for? Who is it for? Is an eye for an eye? Is it rehabilitation? Is it just segregating, harmful elements of society away from the body societal? I just thought it was a great way to look at all those questions. But of course, at the center of that was a guy that wasn't talking to anybody. But I wrote him a letter, and I found it compelling enough to want to speak to me. I didn't want to judge him at that point. I just thought that, I told him it was really in his court if he wanted to speak to me, because I felt that I felt strongly about donation, organ donation, especially kidney donation. I actually knew something about it. I'd, raised money as a kid door to door for the American Kidney Foundation. My father was a nephrologist. I had seen people on dialysis all my life. So I cared about the issue. I knew something about the issue. And I told him that if he was willing to speak to me, I would be able to write a story, I'm sure. And that would increase the pressure, the public pressure on this thing that I thought was a net and inherent good. And if he as a consequence, he did reach out to me, and that began I went to go see him in jail in Somerset County, across the table. And then later I was at his sentencing, with his lawyer. I got to know his lawyer very well, and his priest. Nobody knew I was meeting with him. No one aside from his legal counsel and his priest. And then I would visit with him after his sentencing in maximum security in Trenton, where he was a non-com. He was segregated from the general population. So I'd have to go at night when heavily searched, and a door buzzes open, a door buzzes closed. It's really like you imagine in the movies, and that's all the real baddies that'll get killed by other prisoners there. So in the course of that process of getting to know him, a few things happened. One, I was the only person he was speaking to, so I was sort of burdened with the story, if you will. I had that responsibility, and as a result, a number of other people that weren't willing to speak became willing to speak over that process. So, including the detectives who had worked so hard to catch him, coworkers, friends, family members. I mean, this took years. And over the course of those conversations, I also discovered the existence of a confidential informant that had been vital to stopping him, a woman named, they called Agent Amy, who hadn't been mentioned anywhere, and detectives didn't tell me about her. Cullen eventually told me, and then I quizzed the detective. They were trying to, protect her privacy. But I reached out, and she began speaking to me. But the most important thing I learned in this process was that the original story, which was an understandable but mixed up trained nurse, tried to alleviate the suffering of those he saw around him, and that the hospital and the justice system, eventually did exactly what they're supposed to, and spotted the anomaly, tracked him down and stopped him, and everything's right with the world. It turns out that wasn't the story at all. It turns out that Cullen was doing this for very different reasons. He'd been doing it for 16 years, over 9 different hospitals, and the hospitals knew something was wrong with him over and over again. Whether I don't want to say precisely that they knew he was a murderer, but they certainly knew something was on. They kept passing him along, getting rid of him. And in fact, the last hospital hadn't just spotted the problem and alerted the authorities, they had done the opposite. They spotted the problem, started an internal investigation, and then when the police got involved, incidentally, they actually slowed the investigation. They gave them information that was incorrect. They withheld crucial clues. So the whole story was wrong and backwards, and I felt for that reason it was something I had to take on and had to tell, and that became I published the story about the kidney donation in New York Magazine, and continued researching, and eventually published The Good Nurse.
So the kidney and your obviously involvement is at the end, and then you build a book after you wrote the article about the kidney. You build we're not it's a spoiler alert here. He does allow it, although there's a lot of fight about it. He is allowed to give the kidney. So he was a Navy nurse, came back to the United States to ply his trade, and went through whatever was to go through to get it. And most of his maybe he was trained that way, but he seemed to land in a CCU, which I guess is similar to ICU, but maybe a little less intense. But it's a critical care unit, and so that's where he started. And he had financial issues, so he worked a lot of hours. He was willing to pick up shifts. Everyone loved him. He was a happy guy and everything.
I just going back a little bit, as you say, I do start the story from the beginning, not exactly chronologically, but pretty much chronologically. I thought that was the best way to tell it. I also thought that was the best way to allow the reader to follow my process, which really didn't judge him. It didn't, I had to go meet a serial killer in person, and you have an idea about that in your head. I didn't think that was particularly helpful. I wanted to just learn what I could on the ground, instead of knowing this about his background. Almost treat it like dating or something like that. So I allow his actions to speak for his character and his motives. Instead of saying he's a bad guy, you can decide for yourself. And that's true of his motives as well, which are a little more inscrutable as all of our motives in life are. And then there's what we say is our motive. There's what we think is our motive. And then there's a third thing, which we're probably not in touch with. So rather than creating a false sense of certainty as the narrator, I tried to just let everything speak for itself, which I think makes for a more interesting and frightening story.
One of the other things that frustrated catching him initially slowed down is that, and I gotta laugh, he repeated himself a couple of times. As you say, I think it was 9 hospitals. It wasn't all at one place. So he would, for whatever reason, being let go, or he himself decided to move on, but he was moving around in the general area. I think he went from Pennsylvania, Maine to New Jersey a little bit, but he moved around within you probably could tell me what the radius was. He wasn't going out to California or Ohio or whatever to start to ply his trade or whatever it was. So after a while, they would just say, well, Charlie's gone. And then even a couple of times he returned, like, oh God, we loved you and we need you. So was that not a big part of it, that he covered his tracks by moving around?
Yeah, that's right. He was passed out the back door over and over again. And there were loads of care centers that needed his help, that needed needed a good nurse like him, because Charlie Cullen really was a very good nurse when he wasn't killing patients. So yeah, he never had a problem finding a place. He was able to cross the border between Pennsylvania and New Jersey very fluidly, and take advantage of those 2 states. There wasn't a lot of communication within the state itself, as it turns out, but he was a little more, I'd say, careful sometimes, but he was so surprised that he didn't get hammered right away. He was sure he was caught, because he was at the first hospital he worked at, and where he'd been, he by his estimation, sometimes doing 2 or 3 patients a week, and at a place where they only discovered 1 victim for certain. So that's one of the reasons I know his body count's way off by his own admission. But when they didn't catch him, or when they didn't stop him, he he felt a sort of entitlement and a sort of magic. It's funny because it fed his ego and gave him a sort of confidence that he could keep going, keep doing what he was doing. It also bothered him that they didn't catch him, and so he became a sort of a walking example of the gap between what you imagine to be the point of healthcare, which is something ethical and the good of the patient, and the reality of healthcare, which is perhaps a little more mercenary and for profit. And he exploited that gap, and he became a walking symbol of what's wrong with medicine, if you will. But yeah, he was able to exploit that system and exploit the fact that the hospitals were unwilling to get the police involved. At one of the hospitals, and readers will, I name names. I'm very specific. The only names I changed were names of children, but everyone else is named, especially the administrators, especially the hospitals.
Well, I figured that when they had a first and a last name, I said, he's not making this without an asterisk. I'm saying, okay, that's Mr. Raider and that's Miss whoever. And yeah.
That's right. I thought that was really important. I mean, first of all, it's nonfiction. And I wanted to lean into that, but I also, part of my goal here, the detectives themselves, what they really wanted at the end, in addition to a conviction, was a grand jury to at least ask the question, did the administrators at the hospitals, did the individuals that I name by name in the book and follow as people, did they know, or should they have known, that Cullen was a danger to patients, that Cullen was killing their patients? Did they in any way impede the investigation? Were they the banality of evil in the story? Did they essentially allow a serial killer to operate for 16 years? And they never even got that grand jury. I find that most readers would say yes, they actually facilitated Charles Cullen. Did they know they had a problem? Well, some of the presidents of these hospitals, after they fired Cullen in the middle of the night with a lawyer that comes in, specialized lawyer, they don't alert the police because they don't have a police problem. But the president calls his buddies at other hospitals and says, "Don't hire this guy." And it sort of it's just a little bit of a circular issue because it wasn't reported to police. There's really those any issues that they had with him at the hospital are not really official enough to mention and risk being sued yourself for some sort of discrimination. So that was one issue. The other is, of course, that nobody wanted to admit they had a problem. He always had somebody that liked him at each hospital, and especially working nights. He sometimes, it really varied hospital to hospital. Some places they were onto him. They didn't like him. Some places he felt that he didn't like the environment, but that's usually versus hospitals where the nurses were men. When men started entering the nursing workforce en masse, when the rates went up,
of course, they pay them more because they needed them, so they started paying more. That's how you get nurses. Now, let's take one of his quirks here that I also found fascinating. That he was also, and I put this in quotes, suicidal, because he never was successful. So he would, there's a couple of times he would take pills and whatever. Sometimes there was one where he laid out on his couch because he was trying to, get a rise out of his wife or girlfriend. She sort of went, yeah, fine, I gotta go. Yeah, gotta go shopping. So she didn't buy that. I don't know if he even took pills at that time, but he did take pills. Or drove himself to the emergency room at a hospital, and of course survived. They pumped him with whatever they had to do, and it wasn't real. I mean, it was usually pain meds or something. It wasn't something really, I guess, not really, unless he wasn't cared for, not really lethal. But he'd go there, and didn't he end up like at one of his own hospitals, or I think he said in a psych ward that he then worked for? Yeah, hire someone who tried to commit suicide. Okay, that's good. You're not going to psych them first. You're not going to make them go to psych. No, hey, we got an opening. Can you put your clothes back on? Am I wrong? Did he actually get hired by someone that took him an emergency room or something? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's a crazy story. I mean, this is why a person writes nonfiction. One of the reasons is if I'd made this up, you would have said, "Oh, yeah, you've gone too far. You've gone too far." But that's exactly what happened. You know, he was, he was admitted to one of the hospitals he was admitted to as after a suicide attempt. And you're right to put that in quotes because he obviously knew how to kill people. By my estimate and the estimate of those who know him, who know the case best, he's responsible for perhaps 400 murders over his career. So he knows how to kill people. These were, I don't know, cries for help, cries for attention, cries for sympathy, something. But yeah, he's admitted to a place where he broke into what coworkers' apartment and stalked her. And he's yes hired back by a hospital that knows that he was hired out of a psych ward, and hospitals that he was starting to repeat himself, and the employees also would move around. So occasionally, especially at the very end, he basically had a cup of coffee with one of the hospitals and was let go the same day because nurses at that hospital had already worked with him before, and they just said, "No way are we taking this guy in," and he was gone before he started. So the red flags were raised all over the place, and one of the most important sources of information and the group that was, I think, most afraid to come out were the whistleblowers, the people that had blown the whistle on him, the nurses who had blown the whistle on him throughout his career, had seen that something was very wrong, and had raised issues with the administrators, with their superiors. And it never works well for whistleblowers. They're heroic, and I applaud them, and I try to protect them in my book. That's another, I bury those sources, but their stories are so damning and so compelling. And if they'd been listened to at the time, we would have had a very different story, a lower body count. But they just end up being seen as troublemakers and sidewalk.
One of the people, I think because it's a full name, it's probably and I'll cut this out if it's not her, if I'm using the wrong person or it's not her full name. But before again, this is so great. You talk about linear things rolled. You're getting rolling, and it's not until, like, someone might sit there, somebody stop this guy as you're reading it. Somebody stop this guy. So slowly we get, obviously, the authorities drawn in. And one of the things that got them in was a woman named Nancy Doherty.
Yeah.
And she contacted poison control. And so tell about that story. Correct me if I'm wrong. Near the end, or as things are, cops are coming in, he then sort of, I don't know what you're talking about. Is that the one who did that or someone else? In other words, got scared and said, I don't know if she disavowed everything, but she really stopped she was really pushing with the poison control on her own. She didn't go to her boss. She was doing this. So tell us the story of Nancy.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And that's at hospital number 9 of 9. At the Somerset Medical Center. That's where I slow the story down to real time. The story is very fast. It's slow in the beginning in terms of being in place. There are so many hospitals and so many deaths that it starts to become like a flicker book. And also that's the way his recollection is and his experience was. So I tried to, it's almost like falling down the stairs, and whenever we're in his head, I use his language, his syntax, and his mental process, which is part of what makes you feel scared, and because it slowly creeps you out. You slowly start to feel that the world is not right. But in that part of the story, we're really in pure hospital mode. And Nancy Doherty, she was working in the pharmacy department for Somerset Medical Center. Now, at this point, Somerset Medical Center has had a number of it depends on who you ask. I think they were characterized as suspicious incidents, some of which came close to killing their patients, some of which did kill their patients. And they were calling them suspicious, or no, not suspicious. I'm sorry. In their words, They were unexplained. And they were attempting to do an internal investigation. Now, these unexplained incidents they include, as you know, you've already mentioned the drugs involved. When you have a patient that has digoxin in their system and they're not prescribed digoxin, that may be unexplained, but it's also suspicious. Somebody put it in there. Someone gave it to them. Someone stopped and injected it. That was a conscious thing. And if you've got you've got multiple insulin overdoses, again, this is more than suspicious. This is a conscious effort. And this is synthetic insulin. They can tell. So it's administered by an outside source, all in the same ward. So they knew they had a problem. And instead of alerting the police, they decide to do an internal investigation. And part of that investigation involves those injections. So if someone has a level of digoxin that's here, it's a podcast, so I'm raising, whatever the level is, a hugely elevated level of whatever drug. It was given to them at some point. It was injected into them at some point. And how do you figure out how much was injected and how long ago was it injected? Well, you have to know how the body breaks the stuff down, how you'd have to know a lot about chemistry and body chemistry and that drug in particular. So it's a math problem. It's a chemistry problem. It's a toxicology problem. It's actually a very complicated problem, more complicated than they could solve. But Nancy Doherty, being in the pharmacy department, was tasked by the administration with I'm going to call it a math problem, with the math problem. And it was way over her head because it would be over anyone's head. So she called for help with the math, and she called New Jersey Poison Control. And she reached a physician named Bruce Ruck. And she asked Bruce, exactly that. How much would you have to be given and how much earlier would you need to be given it in order to see these levels at X hour? And while that's an interesting pharmacology question, Bruce Ruck cut right through it and said, wait a minute. Okay, we can solve that problem, but that doesn't change the fact that somebody injected your patient with a drug they're not prescribed at lethal doses, and she got real scared. And I've heard the tapes. I have the tapes, and I transcribed them. I mean, I don't. You don't read the whole transcription, but it's verbatim in the book. And she this is what she's been thinking too. And you can hear the fear and the relief all at the same time. And she just says, and this isn't the only one. This isn't the only patient. We have this problem. And so Bruce recognizes right away, you've got a serial problem here and a police matter. And he says, you have a police matter. You have a police matter. Now that is months and many, many, many deaths before the hospital agrees to make it a police matter. And it's really only because, I don't want to spoil it, but their hand is forced in part because of those very conversations with poison control. Nancy Doherty calls for more help, but most importantly, Bruce Ruck doesn't give up on Nancy Doherty. He says, he wants to say, are you going to do the right thing here? Are you going to do the right thing? And it goes up to his boss, Stephen Marcus, head of poison control, and it goes up to the top of the administration at Somerset Medical Center. And by this point, Nancy Doherty's just in trouble. She's said too much. And so she's sort of gone from the equation now. She can't speak. And the administration, they won't speak, and they really don't do anything about it until Marcus forces their hand. And even when that happens, Cullen's still working. He's still killing. He's not stopped. So it's, as when I found out about all this, again, that narrative that we'd all, I'm sure, believed, which is the hospital realized they had a problem nurse and they called the police and they stopped it. That's a really shorthand version of they realized they had a problem. They didn't call the police. The police eventually got involved and they didn't help them. And they, in fact, steered them the wrong way. And only eventually through other means and an insider, someone, a friend, personal friend of Cullen's, a coworker, a fellow nurse who risked, she's the only normal person in the story, which is to say she doesn't think murder is normal. She's neither a homicide cop, a detective, nor is she a serial killer. And she's got to figure out either my best friend is being slandered and maligned, or I've become good friends with a serial killer and I didn't even know it. He's killing my patients. So she really she puts it upon herself to find out the truth. And it's really only by risking her job and reputation and putting that on the line that this story has ever brought to an end, and that Cullen's ever stopped. It's really exactly the opposite of the story we'd like to believe. And I have to make a note here that, I already said that the detectives wanted that grand jury. So not only did they not get a grand jury for the administrators of these hospitals, but every single administrator involved was given a raise and or a promotion on the back of all of this. Their careers excelled. Their careers were helped by the fact that they prioritized the health of their corporate overlord, their corporate employer, over the care of their patients, the health of their patients. And having Cullen take the full rap, yeah, he's the killer. He's a serial killer. He's the biggest serial killer in American history. He's responsible for all that. But the people that protected him and should have known better and did know better, I feel that they have some answering to do. And I believe we can, this is a book that when you close that back page and you go, good God, did that really happen? I hope the reader recognizes that doesn't need to be the end of the story, that we can demand answers from these people. We can demand that grand jury. We can demand more. So I like to believe, there's no statute of limitation on accessory to murder. So I don't believe this story is done. I would love to write another chapter at one point.
Now, you mentioned, and I'm not going to have you tell it here, they must get the book. The person, I'm assuming that's a name change because there's no full name, Amy.
No. I used her name. She also was married a number of times, and so it was Amy Loughran when I wrote the book.
Maybe it just Amy appears because we all know who she is in the book. But she does become a CI, or whatever you want to call it. She wears a wire. And she even goes further of getting him on there's several pages of her, and she's not a trained whatever, but boy, the cops who are listening go, oh my God, where'd we get her? I mean, he knows what, well, they had not a sexual, but they had a relationship. They were friends. She was having some problems, her own anxiety or whatever, and he saw her.
She had heart issues.
Yeah, and so he brought her along, and that brought a friendship, but it was clearly never romantic or intimate, so they were able to be friends, and he was a nice guy. So she, like I said, she felt bad, she didn't know, but she knew what buttons to, oh, come on, Charlie,
Yeah.
It's not like these guys, you get someone and say, we're going to put a wire on you, and they're like, hi, Tom. I was, oh, God, this is why he's going to shoot her. And so those things, you're not going to tell me about. They've got to get the book to read those. Those are fascinating. It's great. But how much time did you spend with him, interviewing him?
Oh, years.
Yeah, oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it started with the letters. And as I say, it moved on to being able to see him. And I got to know his attorney who just couldn't believe that I actually he'd given me permission. So he had to check. And once that was cleared, I could speak to his attorney pretty candidly. And then I could actually, when he was transferred to another jail, I could speak to Cullen through the video link that was made available for attorneys, which you'd think would be helpful. But the guards were harassing him the whole time. You could hear him screaming at him and listening. And he was not particularly popular anywhere. But especially after he was caught. So, and then meeting him throughout the sentencing, traveling to Pennsylvania where he was sentenced after his appearances in New Jersey. Again, he said nothing except this one phrase that he repeated over and over again in that horrific scene in Pennsylvania, you'll recall, where they basically had to duct tape him to a chair and duct tape a towel over his mouth and wheel him out like Hannibal Lecter. It was absolutely horrifying I mean, it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. Um, and then once he was sentenced, I'd go visit him in Trenton, and that took forever because it would take, if I was even in New York at that point, because I'm, as you know, a Massachusetts resident, but if I was in New York at that point, it was still an hour or more on a train, and then I'd have to get to the prison from there, and then wait to be let in at 10 o'clock at night, and you couldn't bring anything in there, and then get back. So that was kind of slow going. So yeah, that was years of speaking to him, during which time I was developing a lot of other relationships as well. The last time I went to go see him, in fact, I brought Amy to see him, which she hadn't even spoken to him after he was arrested. After seeing him in jail in that final scene, which I, again, won't spoil it, but so they never actually acknowledged the fact that she was a confidential informant, that she was working with the cops. They'd never, and she felt terrible. She knew she'd done the right thing, and yet she felt terrible. So that was a really emotional trip, for everyone but Charlie.
Now, did he, or do you have any insight? He just, he said, why did you write a great letter? You said you started with letters. Why did he hasn't talked to any, why did he pick you?
Yeah, well, we have so much in common.
Your name.
Yeah, the name, which is weird. We did a hi Charlie when we first met each other. I think there are a lot of kids named Charlie now, but there aren't a lot of people our age, so except my dad. Anyway, I know why he started to speak to me, and it was a good letter, but define good letter. I wasn't trying to trick him, but I was trying to appeal to him. And the appeal, as it happens, it took me years to figure out what to call him in terms of, psychiatrically. I'd call him a sociopath, or a psychopath, which are sort of interchangeable. But I already had a sense, even before I met him, that he, like many people, really wanted to service their self-definition. They want to see themselves in a certain way. And the way he saw himself at that point was as a person that would donate an organ for someone else, someone that would give and give, almost Christ-like in their giving. He donated, I forget how many, 16 gallons of blood or something ridiculous over the course of his lifetime, and he kept track of it. This was his self-definition, and I put it in his hands that if he wants, I'm going to have to talk about murder sometimes, because that's why you're there. It would be ridiculous to not. But if you want to talk about this kidney and get this done, a story is going to help it, and not talking is not. And that aspect really appealed to him, and it also gave him. I spoke earlier about motives. And
right, that was I know you said there's like 2, 3, again, after all this speaking, and I know you're not a psychiatrist and you don't play one on TV, but what have you now, after all this time and the time since the book that obviously you've been sitting thinking about it, what do you have any insight?
Oh, sure. One can never know, but I'm as close to knowing as anyone. And it's not just based on my observations and my research, but it's after speaking to professionals and people with really very intimate knowledge of this, who couldn't speak to me directly about Cullen, but over years of these sorts of conversations, I was able to narrow it in. You just really have to ask yourself, what sort of a person can murder somebody, remain in the room as that person is dying, and have their thoughts turning, first of all, not be bothered by it, even if it's the death by poison or drugs or toxins or insulin. Sometimes it's quiet, but not always. There's the example of Mr. Henry, who was in a.
Yeah, I have him on my list, and I will leave it there to read in the book. It's very moving and very sad, because it's like I don't want to acquaint it with lethal injection, but when lethal injection doesn't work, And that man was not, well, again, read about him in the book, but using him, he's a good example of what are you thinking about while that's happening.
And what he's not thinking is about Mr. Henry at all. He's not thinking about those patients. What he's thinking about is something else. Is himself, essentially, at the end of the day. So if you like to kill people, or if you find that killing people works for you, and I'll put an asterisk by that and get back to it. If killing people works for you, you can't be a mechanic. You can't be a dentist. People are not expected to die in that environment, but people are expected to die in a hospital environment. So he either intentionally or by accident found himself in a place where killing, if he liked it, he could continue it. And if he wasn't stopped, he could continue it. Now, did he like it? And I think, you have to examine that. I think it worked for him. He did it because he could. He did it because they didn't stop him. But it worked for him, and that it was a release. It showed that he was smarter. When they were on to him, it made him feel like, he said he felt like James Bond sometimes. He didn't talk about the murders, but I think he felt like he was having a secret, smart life. And it was, again, fulfilling the definition of himself, a definition that he liked. But it was always about him. The people that he killed and when he killed them, sometimes it just has to do with whether he needed that boost, whether he had a bad day, whether the divorce proceedings or the custody battles or money problems were piling up, whether he felt that he'd been disrespected in traffic, whatever it might be. And the taking of a human life, that was his equivalent of working out or keying a car or whatever forms you can imagine. So it didn't mean what you think it did to him. So in terms of motives, he was essentially handed the motive of Angel of Mercy. The detectives, in what they wanted was a confession. I did it, is what they wanted to hear. I killed Reverend Gall, at the very least, was what they were looking for at that point. And what they didn't really need, they didn't need a motive, because they were trying to prove murder with a at least they wouldn't need to with a confession. And so they told him he could either be a creepy sexual predator or an angel of mercy. It was up to him. And he really cottoned onto that angel of mercy, and his personality or his psychosis is such that by the time I met him, I think a part of him believed that. He has many different selves in there, and occasionally the mask drops off with him. But I think that he held that as a shield for himself, something he could cling to. And by this point, years later, he may truly believe it, because he needs his, he still has family members that are talking to him. They were children. He has children. Not to get too much into that, but he needs them to see him as a caring person and the father that they need, as opposed to an unchecked void with needs, which is what he, in fact, is.
Well, I didn't look at the publication date on this, but do you feel, obviously writing the book and obviously research, so you talk to a lot of people and hospitals and that, do you think if they didn't get the grand jury, but do you think someone's been put on notice that you better be careful about your employees, or do you think it's just going to go on the way it's been going?
Well, there were some hand-waving bits of legislation that passed, so-called Cullen laws, in terms of reporting people like Charles Cullen, red flags to future employers. But those laws actually hurt more than they help. They're a slap on the wrist to hospitals that don't report, and they could be potentially career-ending to nurses that do the wrong thing or get reported for a dumb reason. So a hospital passing on Charles Cullen, those hospitals, are on the hook for, just in terms of cold cash. They're hugely liable. for employing a nurse that they knew had problems and that killed their patients, millions and millions of dollars. So, to fine them hundreds of dollars if they get caught not passing on information that they have is absurd. I mean, anyone's going to take that just from a monetary standpoint. In terms of the individuals, I know I've gotten under their skin a little bit, and I like that. I know some of them have tried to hide their trail a little bit. They've moved hospitals, they've moved coasts, they've erased social media. Readers of the book are astounded to know that a lot of these people are still working. At least one of them, amazingly, who's mentioned prominently at the end, actually wrote a book about how he successfully steered his corporation through this problem, which he did not. As a managerial success business book and a speaking tour. But he's just clueless as Cullen is, frankly, in that regard. So, they've been put on notice, but I think, again, in terms of a resume, if the resume needs to highlight protecting the corporate interests, protecting the health of the hospital, protecting their bond rating, I've done nothing but burnish their resumes, and their actions speak to that. So I don't think anything has hurt them aside from the knowledge of their friends and associates.
Now, for the story to go further, when's the movie coming out?
Oh, it came out.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's on. Is it on the book here? Like, see the movie?
Let's see, which cover do you have? Nope, that's
this one.
So there's a new cover for the movie.
All right.
Actually, as it happens, this is not.
I got it there. There you go. Move across the there you go. Well, higher. I think I have seen that maybe on your website.
Yeah, so that's Eddie Redmayne and Jessica Chastain star. Eddie Redmayne plays the.
How long ago and what service? I mean, was a movie? Is it now streaming?
It's a movie. It's now streaming. It's on Netflix. It's called The Good Nurse, and it's the book's better, but because the movie can't. I needed to get everything exact. It would have been convenient to be able to compress some timelines, to change some things, to counterfeit husband. And they change a few things, but they get it basically right. And Eddie Redmayne does a remarkable, I don't know if you know him, but as an actor, he's a remarkable actor. And an Academy Award winning actor.
Yeah.
And does we met because he was faced with the challenge of playing a sociopath, and how do you internalize someone that has perhaps a void inside, and I think he did a marvelous, really fantastic job. And Jessica Chastain.
Well, that's what I'm watching tonight, by the way. So I'll be watching that. So with a few minutes left, give my folks your website.
Sure.
Again, the book, ladies and gentlemen, the book is The Good Nurse. The book is The Good Nurse: A True Story of Medicine, Madness, and Murder by Charles Graeber. There is a movie by the same name now on Netflix. Go see that. But buy the book, because no matter what, then I haven't seen the movie yet, but no matter what, to have it in your hands, be able to even a page back if you want to. I mean, this one again, because I bought it. It's got all the dog ears. I want dog ear a library book, but I dog ear my own. And so you go back and look. Did he really? Oh my God! Yeah, he really said that. Oh my Lord! So get the book. Watch the movie. All right, before I got to go because it's my turn to cook dinner. So tell us your website.
So I do have a website, for what it's worth. It's not particularly well made, but it exists. It's my name, Charles Graeber, Grae, B as in boy, ER. And from there you can see a bunch of other things I've done, some other things I care about. All right, perfect. And I might be using power here any second, so this timing is perfect. Say, Jim, that was really fun.
So have fun. Have a good day. I will be back to you, when it's ready to go up, and give you links if you want to put it up. And this has been so much fun. So I'd like to thank you folks for kindly tuning in for another episode of Murder Most Foul. If you liked what you heard, I hope you'll tell your friends. Information about the podcast and an email link that can get a message to me can be found at the podcast's website, the address being www.murdermost,
murdermostfoul, all one word, no caps, no spaces.com. So, until we meet again, stay safe, and for God's sakes, don't murder anyone.